In 1867, one of the most absolutely bizarre trade deals in all of recorded history was seriously proposed and nearly completed, just before the struggling Russian Empire decided to sell its vast, far-flung eastern territory of Alaska to the rapidly expanding United States. This enormous landmass was actually offered to and almost purchased by a country that is nearly 11,000 times smaller than Alaska itself. This mysterious buyer was located almost on the exact opposite side of the globe from Alaska, separated by 2 continents and multiple oceans. Even more remarkably, it was one of only 2 doubly landlocked nations on Earth, meaning that every single country it borders is also land, making ocean access virtually impossible. Of course, that nation was the tiny Alpine Principality of Liechtenstein, a country so small you could drive across it in 20 minutes. At the time of this incredible offer, Liechtenstein was known primarily for being economically backwards, politically boring, and representing the last surviving remnant of the once mighty Holy Roman Empire that had dominated European politics for centuries. Indeed, just 60 years ago, Liechtenstein's ruling family was forced to sell off some of their most prized artwork collections to keep their entire nation financially afloat. Among these disparate sales was Leonardo da Vinci's famous counterpart to the Mona Lisa, a masterpiece that had been in the family for generations. Yet today, this same tiny principality competes directly with Monaco for the title of wealthiest country on Earth, boasting a staggering gross domestic product per capita of $170,000, along with one of the highest standards of living anywhere in the world. Liechtenstein has achieved the remarkable distinction of being the only country with absolutely no external debts whatsoever. You would be extremely hard-pressed to find many other nations anywhere close to its current level of extraordinary prosperity. But from a casual glance at a map, it's not immediately obvious how this economic miracle was achieved. Liechtenstein's mountainous geography and complete lack of access to ocean coastlines creates terrible conditions for international trade and economic development. Its tiny population of fewer than 40,000 people makes it nearly impossible for manufacturers to achieve competitive economies of scale on the global stage. Most significantly, it has virtually zero natural resources worth exploiting commercially. So how exactly did this tiny Alpine Principality transform itself from being just an isolated valley populated by poor subsistence farmers into one of the richest places on planet Earth? Here at Economic Rewind, we've studied the economic strategies that create extraordinary wealth, and Liechtenstein's story reveals lessons that larger nations have failed to learn. To understand this remarkable transformation, we must travel back to the mid-19th century, when Liechtenstein had somehow managed to maintain its nominal independence through the tumultuous and violent events of European history, despite witnessing the complete dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire, surviving the fall of the Confederation of the Rhine, and watching the formation of a unified German state that changed the balance of European power. Tiny Liechtenstein remained miraculously untouched by these massive political upheavals. However, the reason for this survival was rather uninspiring from a national pride perspective. Liechtenstein was deemed just too poor, too small, and too obscure to warrant serious attention from the surrounding major powers, who were busy conquering and reshaping the continent. The level of neglect was so extreme that the ruling family of Liechtenstein didn't even bother to visit their own principality until some 123 years after originally acquiring the land. They had purchased the territory purely as a means of gaining valuable voting rights in the Holy Roman Empire's complex political system, treating it more like a legal formality than an actual country to govern. Despite its technical independence, Liechtenstein was simply too small and economically weak to survive on its own in the modern world. The principality was forced to enter into a customs union with the powerful Austro-Hungarian Empire, relying almost entirely on this much larger economy for essential food supplies, manufactured goods, and economic opportunities. This economic dependence did have one important benefit. It attracted Swiss textile manufacturers to establish operations within Liechtenstein's borders, representing the country's first tentative steps toward industrialization. Yet progress remained extremely slow due to the harsh mountainous geography, which made the movement of both people and goods extraordinarily expensive and difficult. Unfortunately, things would get dramatically worse before they got better. The outbreak of World War I would prove to be an economic catastrophe for the tiny nation that nearly destroyed it completely. World War I brought unprecedented hardship that threatened Liechtenstein's survival. The principality was completely cut off from food and supplies from the struggling Austro-Hungarian Empire, and despite maintaining neutrality, was subject to harsh Allied economic embargo. Food imports stopped, seasonal work abroad dried up, and young men were trapped at home with no opportunities. The situation worsened when Austria-Hungary collapsed, eliminating Liechtenstein's monetary system overnight. Swiss textile companies left, and the nation faced massive debt from wartime food imports. Already poor before the war, Liechtenstein's people now struggled desperately to survive. Unable to exist independently, Liechtenstein negotiated entry into a customs union with Switzerland. The Swiss understood this was essentially a rescue mission, but Liechtenstein's tiny size meant minimal cost, while creating a useful buffer state and guaranteeing debt repayment. For Liechtenstein, the impact was transformative. The nation attached to the stable Swiss franc and gained access to a larger, advanced economy for work and trade. The union allowed outsourcing costly government functions to Switzerland, dramatically reducing administrative costs. Prince Johann II sold prized family possessions to finance national debts, helping stabilize the crisis. Yet Liechtenstein still faced fundamental barriers: lack of capital, technical expertise, and sufficient population for industrialization. The country needed foreign investment but offered little attraction to investors. This desperation prompted radical policy innovations. Along with a new constitution giving citizens more political power, the government cut taxes to negligible levels and passed revolutionary laws allowing unprecedented business freedoms. Most significantly, they created domiciliary companies, entities registered in Liechtenstein, but conducting no actual business there. Wealthy foreigners could register companies, pay low Liechtenstein taxes, but avoid much higher home country rates. For Liechtenstein, this meant substantial tax revenue with minimal costs, essentially selling legal and financial services rather than competing in manufacturing. The results of these innovative tax policies were immediate and dramatic beyond all expectations. Almost overnight, the number of companies registered in Liechtenstein doubled, then doubled again, as word spread throughout European business circles. With additional personal financing provided by Prince Johann II, who continued to demonstrate remarkable leadership and vision, the nation took a huge economic gamble by investing precious resources in its first hydroelectric power plant, designed to fuel an ambitious new push for comprehensive industrialization. This critical infrastructure investment was strategically combined with the careful opening of the nation's second major bank, which focused specifically on using extremely strict banking secrecy laws to provide a completely secure financial haven for companies and wealthy individuals from the destroyed German and Austro-Hungarian empires. These desperate clients were actively seeking reliable. The banking secrecy laws that Liechtenstein implemented were among the strictest in the world, providing absolute confidentiality that even Swiss banks couldn't match. This created an immediate competitive advantage that attracted substantial capital flows from across Europe. And even government officials sought to protect their assets from currency devaluations, political upheavals, and economic instability in their home countries. That leveraged its unique advantages while minimizing its geographical and demographic disadvantages. The combination of ultra-low taxes, banking secrecy, business-friendly regulations. However, substantial improvements didn't come immediately, as the Great Depression, a massive financial scandal, a terrible flood. The lesson for small developing nations is crucial. Economic transformation requires patience and persistence through setbacks. Liechtenstein's leaders didn't abandon their strategic vision when faced with crises. They adapted while maintaining focus on creating competitive advantages through smart policy design. Yet this difficult period brought valuable industrial and technical knowledge into the country, expertise that proved crucial during the war years. This demonstrates another key principle. Every challenge can become an opportunity if approached with the right mindset. The disruption that hurt Liechtenstein short-term actually built the foundation for future success. As a large portion of Switzerland's skilled workforce was mobilized to stand guard along the borders in preparation for a potential German invasion, a significant shortage of experienced workers began to appear throughout Swiss manufacturing industries, where they discovered a population that was both eager for steady employment and increasingly skilled in modern industrial processes and technologies. This unexpected labor shortage in Switzerland created the perfect foundation for what would eventually become Liechtenstein. Its incredibly successful and internationally competitive manufacturing sector after the war ended. The lesson for developing nations is clear. Geographic proximity to more developed economies can be strategically leveraged into substantial economic opportunity, but only if you've properly prepared your workforce with relevant skills and maintained effectively respond to emerging economic opportunities as they arise in the increasingly dynamic and interconnected global economy today. Liechtenstein succeeded remarkably because it was strategically prepared and ready when neighboring Switzerland desperately needed reliable economic partners and skilled workers for its rapidly expanding manufacturing industries. Not because it attempted to compete directly with much larger, more established economies on their traditional competitive terms and existing historical market-based advantages. The end of World War II marked the beginning of Liechtenstein's transformation into one of the world's wealthiest nations, and relationships that had been developed during the difficult interwar period were finally able to reach their full potential in the more stable post-war environment. First, being small was no longer the overwhelming disadvantage it had been for centuries. In the new, interconnected post-war world, Liechtenstein's tiny size actually began showing significant economic benefits that larger nations couldn't replicate. This represents perhaps the most important lesson for small developing nations. Don't try to copy the strategies of large countries. Small nations can move faster, adapt more quickly, and create more focused strategies than their larger counterparts. For example, small scale often means that positive economic results have outsized positive effects on the entire population. Domiciliary company system. While in most nations, 4,000 companies that pay minimal taxes and conduct no actual domestic business would have negligible economic impact spread across millions of inhabitants. In Liechtenstein's case, during the 1950s, that same revenue was distributed among only 12,000 people. This meant that the nation could maintain extremely low income tax rates for its citizens, while using the tax revenue from foreign-registered companies to maintain high levels of spending on necessary government functions like education, healthcare, and infrastructure. Citizens enjoyed the benefits of excellent public services, without bearing the tax burden that typically funds such services. Here is a critical insight for developing small nations. Focus on policies that create disproportionate benefits relative to your size. Look for economic activities where being small is an advantage rather than a limitation. Liechtenstein succeeded by becoming a specialist provider of services that required trust, discretion, and quick decision-making, all areas where small scale creates competitive advantages. Another major benefit of Liechtenstein's small size was that it had made possible the customs union with Switzerland, which allowed the principality to outsource many costly bureaucratic and administrative functions to its much larger neighbor, dramatically reducing the financial requirements of running a modern government. Small developing nations should actively seek strategic partnerships with larger, more developed neighbors. Don't view dependence as weakness. View it as smart resource allocation. Liechtenstein thrived precisely because it didn't waste resources trying to duplicate expensive government functions that Switzerland could provide more efficiently. Yet the most important advantage that Liechtenstein's size provided was the ability to maintain an unusually effective, efficient, and accountable government. It is simply much easier to implement the right economic policies at the right time in a nation of just 12,000 people than it is in countries with hundreds of millions of citizens and complex, competing interest groups. This offers a crucial lesson for small developing nations. Your size is your superpower when it comes to governance. Use this agility to your advantage by implementing bold reforms that larger nations would find politically impossible. Additionally, it is much easier to keep government officials accountable for their decisions, because it is practically impossible to conceal corruption in such a small community, and frankly much less profitable to be corrupt when the potential gains are limited by the small scale of the economy. Small developing countries should leverage this natural transparency advantage by building reputations for clean governance and reliable institutions. In a world where international investors are increasingly concerned about political risk, small nations that can guarantee clean, predictable governance have a significant competitive advantage. After a brief political scare involving radical movements during the war, Liechtenstein's political leaders converged on pragmatic, centrist ideological positions designed to keep the nation's politics deliberately boring, predictable, and stable. This political stability, combined with the very pro-business policies that had been instituted 2 decades earlier, unleashed an unprecedented torrent of foreign capital and international investment. The lesson here for developing nations is counterintuitive but critical. Boring politics is good for business. International capital flows toward predictability, not excitement. Small countries that can maintain consistent, pragmatic policies across multiple election cycles will attract far more investment than those with dramatic political swings. These developments coincided with the disappearance of Liechtenstein's geographical disadvantages, as innovations in transportation, energy, and communications leveled the playing field between remote locations and major urban centers. Being in an isolated Alpine valley was no longer an overwhelming economic barrier. These positive developments came at the perfect time, with Europe needing reconstruction after the war, and the United States funding massive rebuilding under the Marshall Plan. Demand for high-quality manufactured goods and financial services was unprecedented. Liechtenstein, essentially undamaged by war, and equipped with industrial expertise and foreign investment, became a specialized industrial powerhouse. While the tiny population meant the nation could never compete in high-volume manufacturing, it could thrive in highly specialized, premium quality, low-volume sectors. This started with precision machine components and tools, expanded to scientific instruments and dental equipment, and grew to include pharmaceuticals and electrical sensors. What made Liechtenstein companies global leaders was their exposure to extreme competitive pressure from early development. The government never subsidized industries or protected against foreign competition. With a tiny domestic population, 95% of business was requiring international competitiveness for survival. This competitive pressure created a manufacturing sector internationally renowned for innovation, resilience, efficiency, and quality. Companies had to continuously improve and innovate, creating excellence that larger, protected industries often fail to develop. Small developing countries should deliberately expose industries to international competition rather than protecting them. While more difficult short-term, this creates stronger, more innovative companies long-term. Today, Liechtenstein dominates specialized global industries despite its tiny size. It produces 20% of the world's dentures, and your dentist's equipment is likely made there. This excellence created high-quality, well-paying manufacturing jobs. Manufacturing wasn't the only driver of economic success. The rapid growth of financial and banking services, combined with tax haven status, proved equally important. By the 70s, Liechtenstein's political stability, neutrality, Swiss monetary attachment, and strict banking privacy laws made it ideal for wealthy individuals worldwide, from business CEOs to drug lords, seeking secure wealth management. While questionable activity occurred, most business was legitimate. The nation specialized in accounting, managing trusts, and holding companies, and facilitating international business structures. At this time, registered companies taking advantage of tax strategies ballooned to over 50,000, more than double the citizen count. This enabled ridiculously low personal income taxes while funding excellent infrastructure, education, and healthcare with virtually zero national debt. When it seemed like economic conditions couldn't get any better for tiny Liechtenstein, these strategic international agreements gave Liechtenstein much broader and significantly freer trade access to over 500 million potential customers across Europe and beyond. For a nation whose economy was almost entirely based on exports and providing financial services to foreign clients, the manufacturing sector quickly outgrew what the tiny domestic population could support, which caused Liechtenstein to become a net importer of skilled labor from surrounding countries. Today, roughly half of the entire workforce commutes daily into Liechtenstein from neighboring Austria and Switzerland, creating a unique economic model that maximizes productive capacity while maintaining the social and political advantages of a small population base. This innovative approach to cross-border labor markets partially explains how Liechtenstein has achieved the highest net exports per capita of any nation in the world, enabling an astounding 50% trade surplus that continuously generates substantial wealth for the country and its citizens. It was the financial sector that truly benefited most dramatically from becoming more globally integrated through these comprehensive international agreements. This integration ultimately led to frenzied growth that firmly cemented Liechtenstein's position as one of, if not the absolute richest nation in the world on a per capita basis. However, this remarkable financial growth did come with ever-increasing international scrutiny about the country's questionable banking practices and aggressive tax avoidance facilitation. After a number of leaked documents and high-profile scandals revealed that Liechtenstein had become a significant hub for international money laundering and sophisticated tax avoidance schemes, the Principality was placed on the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development's official blacklist of non-cooperative tax jurisdictions. This international pressure eventually forced Liechtenstein to remove its special banking privacy laws in 2009, ending an era of absolute financial secrecy that had been crucial to the country's economic model for decades. While this policy change did hurt the nation's growth rate somewhat and temporarily shook international clients' confidence in Liechtenstein's financial services sector, the country proved remarkably adaptable to changing global standards. Liechtenstein remains an extremely attractive location for conducting legitimate banking and other financial business, thanks to its continued political stability, excellent infrastructure, and sophisticated expertise in complex international transactions. This adaptability allowed the nation to recover quickly from the negative effects of increased transparency requirements and international oversight. Today, Liechtenstein produces some truly incredible economic statistics that demonstrate the remarkable success of its unique development model. The Principality boasts the second highest per capita income and life expectancy in the world, along with one of the highest rankings on the United Nations Human Development Index, which measures overall quality of life across multiple dimensions, including health, education, and economic opportunity. Liechtenstein citizens enjoy access to some of the best healthcare and education systems anywhere in the world. This has helped offset the inevitably high cost of living that occurs in any wealthy nation like Liechtenstein, where demand for housing and services far exceeds supply. Crime rates are extremely low throughout the country. Unemployment barely exceeds 1% of the workforce, and there are constantly new opportunities for well-paying jobs in either the advanced, manufacturing or sophisticated financial sectors. And high quality of life has created what many international observers consider to be one of the most successful small countries in modern history. Ultimately, Liechtenstein was able to take deliberate advantage of its unique characteristics and favorable global economic trends to rapidly transform from a literally starving agricultural community into a nation of unrivaled per capita prosperity. This transformation was accomplished by instituting pragmatic and well-timed free market policies. While a significant amount of Liechtenstein's success was certainly helped by favorable historical circumstances and some ethically questionable financial practices during certain periods, the Principality's story ultimately demonstrates that political institutions, economic policies, and strategic foresight are much more important for creating lasting prosperity than favorable geography, abundant natural resources, or large populations. Here at Economic Rewind, we believe that Liechtenstein's remarkable transformation offers invaluable lessons for small developing countries. The key insight is that competitive advantages can be created through smart policies and strategic positioning, even when traditional advantages are absent. The 5 most important lessons for small developing countries are: first, embrace your small size as a strategic advantage. Small nations can implement policies faster and adapt more quickly than large countries. Use this agility to experiment with bold reforms that larger nations would find politically impossible. Second, focus exclusively on export-oriented industries from day one. Don't waste resources serving tiny domestic markets. Build companies that can compete globally from their first day of operation, forcing continuous improvement and innovation. Third, form strategic partnerships with larger, developed neighbors rather than duplicating expensive government functions. View economic integration as smart resource allocation. Liechtenstein thrived by outsourcing costly services to Switzerland while focusing on unique competitive advantages. Fourth, maintain deliberately boring, predictable politics focused on pragmatic policies. International capital flows towards stability. Countries that guarantee clean governance and consistent policies across election cycles attract far more investment than those with dramatic political swings. Fifth, identify narrow niches where you can achieve global dominance rather than competing across many sectors. However, looking toward the future, the traditional tax haven model that partially fueled Liechtenstein's success faces unprecedented challenges in our increasingly transparent global financial system. The era of absolute banking secrecy and aggressive tax avoidance is rapidly ending as international organizations implement comprehensive information sharing agreements and automated exchange systems. Here at Economic Rewind, we predict that successful small nations must evolve beyond simple tax arbitrage strategies within the next decade. The OECD's Common Reporting Standard and similar initiatives are making it increasingly difficult to hide wealth offshore. Countries like Liechtenstein that build prosperity on financial secrecy must adapt or risk economic obsolescence as their traditional business models become legally untenable. The most successful small nations in the next decade will likely focus on legitimate value creation rather than regulatory arbitrage. This means developing genuine expertise in emerging technologies like blockchain technology, artificial intelligence applications, quantum computing, and sustainable finance solutions. Liechtenstein has already begun this crucial transition by becoming one of the first countries to comprehensively regulate cryptocurrencies and digital assets with clear legal frameworks. We anticipate that future economic success belongs to nations offering specialized knowledge, cutting-edge technology infrastructure, and streamlined regulatory frameworks for legitimate businesses operating in high-growth sectors. The old model of simply offering low taxes and banking secrecy is becoming economically unsustainable, as global tax cooperation intensifies through multilateral agreements and technological surveillance capabilities. Smart small nations will strategically position themselves as innovation hubs and technology centers, rather than traditional tax havens, focusing on attracting high-value businesses through superior governance, world-class digital infrastructure, and regulatory clarity, rather than through opacity and tax avoidance schemes. Countries making this transition successfully will thrive in the digital economy, while those clinging to outdated secrecy models will likely face increasing international pressure, economic sanctions, and inevitable decline. The future belongs to nations that can demonstrate genuine value creation, technological leadership, and transparent governance, rather than those relying solely on financial engineering and regulatory arbitrage that exploit loopholes in international tax systems. Liechtenstein's journey from an isolated valley of poor farmers to one of the world's richest nations demonstrates that economic success is ultimately about making smart choices rather than inheriting natural advantages. For small developing nations, your limitations can become strengths if you design the right strategies to leverage them.